After the leaders of South Korea and the United States wrapped up their bilateral talks last month, US President Joe Biden appointed a special envoy for North Korea, Ambassador Sung Kim. After a months-long policy review on North Korea complete and South Korea backing Washington's practical approach, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman told reporters last Wednesday that the US is now ready for dialogue. So the ball seems to be in North Korea's court. How will it respond? For the answers to this, we speak with Mark P. Barry, Associate Editor of the International Journal on World Peace, and Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Korea Chair at the Brussels School of Governance and Associate Professor of International Relations at King's College London. Warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us again. Well, let's go straight into the questions, starting with you, Dr. Barry. Now, US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, she told reporters last Wednesday that the US already signalled it's ready and prepared to have dialogue with the DPRK. And she added that Washington hopes North Korea will take them up on that possibility. Do you think this is an open invitation to talk?
Of course it is, but the public statements, which have been frankly few and far between, and it should be noted that other than President Biden's statements at the summit with President Moon, that much of the minimal detail that we have on the North Korea policy review came in a press gaggle aboard Air Force One by White House Press Secretary Jennifer Psaki. So it was meant to be kind of a leak to whet the appetite, and it was not meant to do much more. And the fact that it hasn't been revealed with a little more flesh, at least publicly, is not helping recommence dialogue with the DPRK. But that said, it's a good start, and I imagine that there are more informal contacts going on between not only American diplomats, but probably members of the U.S. intelligence community and others who act on America's behalf. And these kinds of conversations could be happening in Beijing and other capitals. And so we have to assume North Korea knows a little more, but they are probably rather disquieted and upset that they don't know as much as they'd like to know.
Right, and Dr. Pacheco Pardo, North Korea did initially criticize Washington's policy approach, saying that it does still appear hostile towards the regime. And, well, what do you think were its main concerns or really the source of its disappointment?
Well, I guess from a North Korean perspective, that's going to be the starting point. The starting point of any negotiations is that it is the U.S. fault, that the U.S. has a hostile policy towards Pyongyang, and therefore that the U.S. has to change its behavior towards North Korea. So I think it's a usual bargaining position that North Korea would have. Of course, North Korea would have liked to go back to the Trump years and have top-level summits between the President of the United States and the North Korean leader. We know this is not going to happen. Personally, I think it's good that there will be negotiations at a lower level first. And I think that North Korea might be disappointed about these top-level negotiations not taking place. But I do think that above all, this is really a North Korean bargaining position that will continue until at some point we have discussions between Washington and Pyongyang. Probably with Seoul involved as well, with the South Korean government, and then we'll see what North Korea wants from the U.S. and where it is willing to go in negotiations with the U.S. and, of course, with South Korea as well.
Right, so it's unlikely that things will return to what they were like during the Trump years. And Dr. Barry, the U.S. has said that it's going to take a calibrated approach and that the administration will be trying to avoid policy failures of the past. But there's still been some criticism that the Biden administration hasn't offered much clarity on how Washington will handle the biggest sticking points, as you previously mentioned. What do you think should be Mr. Biden's way forward?
Well, as much as I applaud his appointment, for example, of Sung Kim, all of a sudden we learned that he's still going to be mostly full-time U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, despite his incredible track record going back to being U.S. ambassador to the ROK. I was hoping he would appoint someone at the level of Secretary Kerry, who's now the U.S. climate czar, someone who could authoritatively speak not just on behalf of Secretary Blinken, but on behalf of President Biden. That's the way to tell North Korea that they're serious, that the U.S. is serious. But the dilemma for the Biden administration was the fact that Trump has become a kind of a persona non grata in the Biden administration's public discourse, and the prior president doesn't make things any easier for himself. But the dilemma for the Biden administration was the fact that in 2018 and 2019, there was substantial give and take between not only President Moon and Kim Jung-un, but 3 summit meetings, more or less, between President Trump and Kim Jung-un, and a lot of letters, about 20 letters. And we've only read the ones that Kim has sent or at least some of those that he sent to President Trump. The White House never released those letters from President Trump to Chairman Kim. So the problem is the Biden administration couldn't ignore what happened because it was the leader of North Korea who had met with the predecessor of President Biden, but they didn't want to play that up at the same time. So it's an ambiguous policy that is really, in my view, meant to say, we really hope not to deal with this issue, at least for the first 2 years. But as we found out in the events of May, that the events in the Middle East, for example, between Israel and Gaza, completely consumed President Biden's time. And in fact, the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza was arrived at the night before the summit between President Moon and President Biden. And fortunately, that freed President Biden to spend much more time than he could have spent if the ceasefire had not been arrived at. So you can't always have things the way you want when you're a leader of a major nation.
So Sung Kim, who's going to spend most of his time in Indonesia, he's also been appointed the ambassador for North Korea, the dialogue surrounding North Korea. And Dr. Pacheco, Pardo, do you think North Korea is considering talking with Sung Kim if they do decide to give things a shot? And who would be his counterpart from the regime, and how exactly would the talks proceed?
Well, we do know that North Korea and the U.S. Have been in contact. We do know that the U.S., the Biden administration, has let North Korea know more details about its policy towards Pyongyang. So I do think that at some point we will see a dialogue between the Biden administration and North Korea. I would assume that Kim Jong-il, the former ambassador to Vietnam, who held discussions with Stephen Biegun, the former North Korea envoy from the Trump administration in Stockholm in 2019, I will assume that he will continue in his role. That would make sense. Having said that, when we're going to see the resumption of the discussions? Well, we see that North Korea continues to have a close border. It is true that it seems that trade with China has started to resume, but one thing is trade with its neighboring country, with China. Something very different is allowing foreigners, for example, to go back to Pyongyang, and we're talking about ambassadors that are posted to Pyongyang. So I wouldn't expect anything from North Korea in terms of opening up the borders until the autumn. And if things don't go well with the vaccine rollout in North Korea, it doesn't receive the vaccines from the COVAX facility, for example, we might be looking into the spring of next year, which probably is one of the reasons why Sung Kim has been appointed part-time, because Indonesia obviously is a very important country from the perspective of the US, and North Korea is not opening up. So until it opens up and is able to send diplomats overseas, to allow diplomats to go into North Korea, there is only so much you can do through letters and through other channels. At some point, you actually have to meet face-to-face and have days of discussions. And North Korea seems not to be ready to do this at this point.
Well, Dr. Barry, as Pyongyang dissects America's policy review, what are some factors that Kim Jung-un would be considering, particularly with the geopolitical tensions between the US and the North's only ally, China?
Well, many analysts like to say, of course, it boils down to regime survival, but regime survival, they never use that phrase, I don't believe, but they are very insistent that their sovereignty shall not be impinged upon. And they're not actually referring as much to the US as by other people, other neighbors, and primarily China. So what I see happening today is that with President Xi more or less a president for life, much like President Putin in Russia, he can say or convey to Kim Jung-un something along these lines, that we have more similar systems than ever before in a long time. It's a single leader system in a sense, with a top leader who can ultimately make all the decisions. And also China is now preeminent in Northeast Asia, having achieved its goals. And therefore, North Korea would do very well to become what we used to call a tributary state, or what in 20th century terms was often called Finlandization, referring to how the Soviet Union had a leash on Finland. And so I'm concerned that China would like to give nominal sovereignty to North Korea, but basically compel it to have its economy become more and more integrated with that of China, and particularly Northeast China, and that its foreign policy will be dictated by China and not independently by the Kim leadership. So if I were Kim Jong-un, I'd be looking at this whole situation and saying, I absolutely need to find some meaningful relationship with the United States that will improve relations as a counterbalance to China. And also, I need to make an accommodation with South Korea, because that will help, along with U.S. accedence to that accommodation with South Korea, will help put off the pressure that I'm sure he's feeling with China. And also because he knows he can't rely on China and he can't rely on Russia. But he can rely more on South Korea and the United States, because in reality, they are much more benign powers. So the future of North Korea is actually to lean a little bit towards the US and South Korea as a means of survival.
Well, we lost your video connection a bit there, Dr. Barry, so we'll be resuming with our audio. But, well, Dr. Pacheco, Pardo, President Moon Jae-in has been working really hard to keep this North Korea agenda going. Do you still see Seoul continuing to fulfill that role to facilitate progress in US-North Korea dialogue and trust building in the months to come?
Well, I think so. I think President Moon has been very clear that that's his policy, and he's going to continue to pursue it until the end of his term, which is actually what he promised voters when he ran for election. And I think that now what you see with the Biden administration is much more consultation with South Korea, with other allies as well, of course. There was a consultation process when the current administration was coming up with its North Korea policy. Clearly, the Biden administration sees South Korea as an ally in many different issues, not only on the North Korean nuclear issue, which gives leverage to South Korea, because it can go to the US and say, okay, we will support your policy, for example, on the Indo-Pacific, on the South China Sea, even on the Taiwan Strait or Taiwan, as we saw recently in the Biden-Moon summit that took place in Washington. So there's this leverage that South Korea can use to say, well, we will support all your policies, and in return, we want to resume dialogue with North Korea. We would resume dialogue with North Korea as well, and if possible, at some point, we would like to have some sanctions waivers to reinitiate economic links between the two Koreas. So I think that President Moon will continue to pursue his policy, thinking that there is an administration in the U.S. that might be more willing than the previous administration, the Trump administration, to actually listen to the position of Seoul and maybe even support the position of Seoul, something that I don't think the Trump administration really did.
And Dr. Pacheco, Pardo, well, we also heard that North Korea's ruling party has established a de facto second-in-command under leader Kim Jung-un. Are we seeing the North Korean leadership shift from a dictatorship to a more party-based political system? I mean, what do you think was the reason for this major change?
Well, we have seen how Kim Jong-un has really given more importance to the party. He convened a couple of party congresses. The last one had been in 1980. So his father, Kim Jong-il, had actually skipped this, and Kim Jong-un has already convened a couple of them. We have seen how the military has become more secondary, for example, to economic development in North Korea under the current leader, and the Kim Jong-un, compared to his father, again, who had a military-first politics. So I think that clearly the Kim family continues to rule, and Kim Jong-un continues to be at the top. I mean, his sister seems to be very important as well in taking decisions. But I do think that probably we're moving towards a more collective rule in which other members of the party have a say in policy that maybe they didn't have under Kim Jong-il, or they didn't have under Kim Il-sung during the last decade or so of the Kim Il-sung government. So I do think that there is more collective decision-making process, even the ultimate decision. I think we can all agree on this, is still being taken by Kim Jong-un himself, probably in consultation with his sister and a couple of other people.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to end the interview today, as we're out of time. But that was Mark P. Barry, Associate Editor of the International Journal on World Peace, and Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Career Chair at the Brussels School of Governance and Associate Professor of International Relations at King's College London. Thank you both so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.